I'm going to take you for another walk. It's a beautiful sunny day, a bit on the cold side and a bit breezy, so I'm hoping that the wind doesn't affect the microphone too much. But I just thought it would be lovely to go out just for a few minutes. So I'm looking back at the house now towards Mount Elephant, and last time we walked in that direction, which is east, but this time I thought we might go in the other direction and go west. So now we're looking up the paddock and I'm going to walk along here. This is often the way that I walk when I want to collect some Banksia sprigs. And this used to be our access, but we built a new driveway and entrance when we built the house. It's just a car going past. And as you can see, it's quite a lovely wide open space here. And I wanted to show you something here if I can find it. I'm pretty sure I'm in the right place. Yes, here we are. Can you see this hole in the ground? That is an echidna burrow. A while ago, just go around to the side. A while ago, I showed a movie or a short clip of an echidna at the front of the house. And Ian found its burrow because he saw it right near where this burrow is. This is a good spot actually to look at St. Patrick's Head. St. Patrick's Head is the core of an old volcano, an ancient volcano, and it's been called St. Patrick's Head because from the town side of it, which is a few kilometres away in that direction, it looks like a bishop's mitre because it's a perfect pyramid almost from that angle, and that's why it was called St. Patrick's Head in the early days of settlement. This is one of the Banksia trees that I harvest the leaves from, and I think you can see there are lots of cones. The brown ones are the ones that are about to set seed. I don't see any yellow ones at the moment. The yellow ones are when they're fresh. I think there's one up here. Don't know if I can reach high enough for you to see it. And they have a lovely scent, just very gentle. And when they set seed, the black cockatoos come along and pick the seeds out of them. Where you see those openings on the sides of the Banksia cones, that's where the seeds were. The black cockatoos love them. I'm now coming up to an area that we've had cleared recently. This is because we had a bit of a weed problem. And since we're registered for Land for Wildlife, one of our responsibilities is to control weed infestation. We had a problem with some of the wattle trees self-sowing to such an extent that Ian couldn't access the Spanish heath, which is an invasive imported weed. We think it came in when people wanted them for bouquets, for funerals, and there's a cemetery not far from here in sort of a northwesterly direction, probably in that direction. And the seeds have just invaded. We had problems with it at St. Helens too, which is right on the coast. So the ground has been mostly levelled, and looks like there's some gutter there that Ian's going to put on the shed. But there's a big pile now of the self-sown water trees and the Spanish heath. And because it's clear, Ian will now be able to get at it with the tractor because we can see some small ones coming up and the slasher will handle them. So this is Spanish heath just here, and that will keep them under control. Head a bit further in this direction. We've got a really big shed up this way, and there are also some eucalypts which are still quite young growing up here. Sometimes I harvest leaves from there as well. Ian did a lot of clearing here when he was well enough last year before he got sick, But it looks like some more branches have fallen down. That pile over there is part of his clearing. And he took away a lot of the old fence as well. But this is new stuff that's fallen down. That looks like an old black wattle or an acacia there, and that's obviously dropping limbs. It is a little bit windy, so I'm keeping away from the tall trees at the moment because sometimes they can drop things without warning. Down here you can see it's probably a damp area because there's a lot of lomandra and other plants that really like wet ground. So we just let them grow because if they choose where they're going to grow, obviously it's a good place for them. And again, St. Patrick's Head behind the trees there. This is another type of eucalyptus which is very common here. I think it's a peppermint gum. It has very narrow leaves and it prints a charcoal grey kind of colour. And it looks as though there are lots of little gum nuts. You can see that. They're very tiny, little tiny gum nuts. I've now come up to the big shed, and just beyond that is the fence for our top boundary and the gate we used to use for access to the property. And if I turn around, you'll see the bush across the road, which is also part of the whole property. And then when I turn around, I'm facing back towards Mount Elephant and the house. I just love it here. It's so beautiful. Very Australian, very different from the Canadian landscape that I grew up in, and of course the European landscape, which I've never seen, but I have seen pictures of it, of course. And I think the first settlers must have found it very strange when they first came. Also because of the animals and the birds, they must have seemed so exotic. Can you hear that bird? That's a type of cuckoo. I've just walked a bit further down and you can see what a beautiful spot our house is situated in. I never get tired of this. While I'm walking, I'll just let you know that I so appreciate the hundreds of lovely messages and comments that I received about my sisters passing away. Mary passed away about 10 days ago. Quite suddenly. She hadn't been well, but we didn't expect her to go because she seemed to be actually recovering. She's had chemo for over 6 months. She also broke a hip, which wasn't what she wanted. Recovered from that operation and then collapsed while she was out with her husband. But we had a beautiful memorial service for her at her church in Launceston in Tasmania. And there was lots of music, memories, some wise words from the two preachers, which were very comforting as well. And we saw lots of people we hadn't seen for a long time, as well as spending time with close family. So that was a very, very special day. A lot of the people in my family play music. So one of my nephews who plays guitar and teaches music was playing for the community singing. His wife was singing, plus another friend of theirs. I don't know her name, but it was just lovely. And then another nephew sang a song by Handel in Italian. He's classically trained and he's also a music teacher. They're actually brothers. Just wait for the car. And I managed to sing something too. Ian and I perform music together, although not as much as we used to. And I thought if I was able to, I would. And I was able to. Some of us also shared memories of Mary. She was very talented. She was a ceramicist when she was younger, and then later on she used to do displays for the city mission for the collectibles, and she had a real eye. One of my sisters shared that she set up a Christmas setting with items she'd saved all through the year, vintage and retro and stuff that people have donated, and someone bought the whole table setting for their Christmas day. So that just shows you how good she was at it. She also modelled for me at Remade, which is a sustainable fashion event, for several years in a row. I didn't enter it last year because she wasn't well enough. She just in the process of being diagnosed, I think, at the time. So I just wanted to share that with you, take you for a walk in a different direction to last time. I'm just watching my footing here because the ground's a bit rough, and we'll head back towards the house and I'll share a bit more from there. A couple of videos ago I mentioned that I was planning to make two little books, one with cloth pages and one with tea bag pages. I had a big enough piece of eco-printed wool, which was from an old blanket, to do both. But when I started to make this one, I thought it would really be nice with a bit extra wrapped around it, so that if any stitching was done in it and it needed to expand, it would have room for that. So of course then I had only this amount left, which is definitely not enough to make a cover for the tea bag book. So that will wait, and I'm sure it will happen at some point. I really enjoyed making this little book. I did this after we came home from my sister's funeral and spending some time with family, and it was just lovely to work on this. As you can see, I've got a little clock face on the front. This was in some things that were sent to me by one of my lovely followers, and I was planning to use it in my stitch journal that I'm going to do with Catherine Chambers of Catherine Cloth Tales. But I just felt that it looked really good on here, so I've actually stitched it onto this little book. Because of the clock face, I've called this Timeless. And to open it, I've made a press stud closure with a little bit of slack in it, so that if the book gets thicker from stitching or whatever, it will have the room to cope with that. I had a strip from when I trimmed off the cover to make it fit. So I stitched that onto the book and round to the back, and then it continued and became the closure. It also was narrower at one end and wider at the other, and I did think about trimming it to make it all even. But then I thought, no, I really like that, and I often use my scraps the way they are rather than trimming them, and it gives you some interesting opportunities. So that's what I ended up with. The flap ended up a little bit plain, so I did some cross stitch and 2 lines of running stitch. I only used a couple of colours, a kind of a gold coloured pearl cotton and a brown pearl cotton, and then this is a cream pearl cotton. And that was pretty much all I used, except for some sewing thread to stitch this here. And when I put the pages in, I used some wax linen thread that I have. And I used what is basically a pamphlet stitch. I made holes with my awl. It was a little bit tricky lining them up when I was sewing it all together, because cloth isn't as easy to stitch through for that kind of thing as paper is. But it worked out, and the back you can see the stitching here, but on the front you can't see it because I decided to leave the cover open and loose like that. The pages I did a few weeks ago, and I shared that in a previous video, using a method that Catherine Chambers also taught us earlier in the year, I think. And that was to sit a rusty item on top of a piece of cloth, and when you've had your cup of tea, to actually put the tea bag on top of it and then leave it for 12 to 24 hours. And what happens is the rust and the tea colour the cloth, and you get this lovely imprint. You also get imprints on the tea bags, which I really love. I also dip the cloth in tea before I did that. So I make a pot of tea in the morning. I use that tea to dip the cloth in. And then when I had my next cup of tea with a tea bag, I laid the rusty washer or whatever on top and then the tea bag. And there's a lot of variation. And because I just tore the pages or tore the cotton randomly, they're not all quite the same size, but I quite like that. I do that with my books deliberately sometimes. Some of them are not quite straight when I put them in, but it all adds to its rustic flavour, I think, or rustic look. It's got quite a lot of pages in it. I haven't counted them. And I've left the stitching exposed inside the cover. I haven't covered it up. And in the description in my online shop, I've called it Rustic, because that's what it is, and that's what the name of my business is. So this will be for sale in my online shop at gonerustic.com after the video tonight, and you might like it for your stitch journal. Lots of possibilities. You can leave the pages as they are, or you can do some lovely stitching on them. You might remember when I was talking about my vases jelly prints that the first layer was made with crumpled paper. So I thought I would just show you a couple of the sheets. This is red tissue paper that came around a present or something like that. And I crumpled it all up, pressed it onto the jelly plate, and then took a paper print from that. And you can see that when I flattened it out, you might not see that one so well because that's red, but certainly with this purple one you can see it. It left these lovely marks on the paper, and it also left those lovely marks on the prints that I did as well. And what I've been doing is I've been using these sheets again for pickup prints. So when I stenciled the vases on the vase artworks that I made, I picked up the paint, excess paint, after I finished the stenciled part with this tissue paper, so it got a second layer. When I did the last layer on my bird prints, I used it again to pick up the paint after I'd laid some foliage. But these actual pickup sheets are actually really interesting in themselves, and it looks very different on the red to what it would look if I did it on white tissue paper. I have no idea what I'm going to do with these, but there certainly are possibilities. I wanted to do another layer on my bird prints, and I was thinking of doing foliage, which I think I mentioned in my last video. So I went outside yesterday and I got some fishbone fern and some leptomeria. I could have got some casuarina, which is a more curved kind of sprig or leaf. Not really a leaf, it's more like long pine needles. But I saw the leptomeria and I thought, yes, that might work. And then I also picked some long blades of lamandra leaves. And there are kind of two sections to my bird prints. The first ones that I did are actually the last ones I did the botanicals on. So they've become birds 4 and 5. This one goes this way. And because this one had a dark background, the leaves are not very distinct on that, but they are more distinct where the bird section is. This one was paler and it actually shows up quite well. I had used leftover paints from previous gel prints on my jelly plate to make some backgrounds and also do the pickup from the vases. And these became the backgrounds for the bird prints. I'm just trying to remember what the process was, but I think that's what I did. And to me, these look as though they could really be enhanced with some stitching. I'm going to make these available as downloads, either high res or medium res. And then you can use them for stitching. So this was the first one I did with the foliage, and you can just see the bird in the background. And to me that looks a bit like camouflage, but also reminds me of my woodland series and my wetland series of stitched and collaged books that I made, where I talked about the birds becoming extinct, and I outlined their shapes in white to represent the fact that they might just be a memory. And I think this kind of connects to that, although it wasn't a conscious thing. They're hiding behind the foliage. That's how it looks to me anyway. And I played with my masks and stencils that I made and rearranged them in different ways. So I've called that one bird 1, this one is bird 2, and this one is bird 3. So they've got similar colours and shapes, and I've used similar leaves, but they are all different. These downloads will be available after this video is finished. But the other thing that I think I might do is I might write a short free tutorial and do a video about it and turn it into an online class, which will be free. And the reason I'm doing this is because I've reached another milestone. I didn't know until the other day, because I haven't really been checking, that my Instagram account has now reached 10,000 followers. I'm quite amazed by that, but it's just a lovely thing that people are enjoying what I share on Instagram. If you haven't seen my Instagram account, it's just called Gone Rustic, so it's easy to find, and you can have a look at the things that I share sometimes before they come up in the video. The fact that I have 10,000 followers on Instagram has also led to a new opportunity. I'll just tell you a little bit about it, and then hopefully as I know more, I can share more in the future. It's actually an app, and it's a coaching app, and what it does, it gives people all sorts of tips and techniques and little snippets and short tutorials and all sorts of things to suit your subject area that you're interested in. So we'll just see what happens, but it's a very exciting development in what has been a difficult couple of weeks. Last week when I mentioned that I had made these vases jelly prints available as downloads, I also said that I'd done 4 others. So there were 7 in total, 3 in this group and 4 in this. These have more of a green colour in them because I used that when I did the stenciling for the last layer, and they just seemed a bit blank to me. The other ones had a bit more texture in them, so I felt that they were fine as they were, but these seem to need something else. So what I did was I added some simple stitching, similar to what I did in my accordion books, the Icarus series. There are 2 in that series, and also the one about When Dusk Falls and Silver Lining. And often with something like this, where there's so much going on, you don't need to do anything very complex. So I decided just to do a straight stitch on the side of the vases where perhaps the light would be shining. And in a painting, you might paint that or highlight that in a different way. But I thought I would just simply highlight it using my cream pearl cotton that I use so much of and I've nearly run out of. And it was just right. And one of the tips that I've shared in some of my tutorials about stitching on paper is you can reinforce the back, especially where you end and begin a line of stitching. Here I've just used paper and a glue stick. Sometimes I use double-sided tape and cover the whole line of stitching if the paper is a bit more fragile, but this is thin card, so it's pretty robust. And I've done all 4 in a similar way, not always the same number of stitches. I just went with the flow. And I have a little homemade awl type of thing that I made with a cork and a needle, because that does some nice fine holes for when you want to stitch something that's not too thick. So I've called these vases 4, 5, 6 and 7. And as you can see, they're all slightly different because of the way I've jelly printed them with the different colours, different stencils and so on. These I'm thinking of getting framed, and I've done some trials with an app that I have called VOUN, VOUN. And I've done some trial mat mounts and framing just to see what it would look like. These I may get framed as well, but at this point they are available as downloads at gonrustic.com, either in high res or medium res, depending what you want to do with it. I really enjoyed this process, doing the stenciling for the last layer, cutting the stencil and actually doing the jelly printing with the stencil. I really enjoyed. And I can see that there is more of that coming up in my future. Since I saw you last time, I have finished all the stitching and applique on my journal cover for the second part of Words 2026. I haven't done the edges yet, but I'm going to do those by machine, but that's the only thing left to do. I printed out some copies of the cloth that has the butterflies on it in the other journal, so I could stitch them onto here, and I really like what's happened with that. I've even used a little tiny snippet here and attached it with cross stitch. I was going to use organza, and the organza is lovely, but it just wasn't quite distinct enough to use on the cover. So I ended up using the cotton. I printed out cotton, silk and organza, which is also silk, and it was the cotton that I ended up using. I'm really happy with how it looks, and I think that's pretty much ready to go now. One of the things that's really helped me over the past 2 weeks is doing stitching, and I made the collage background beforehand without knowing what the word was, and then I thought, well, this really does suit the neutral theme. It's all naturally dyed fabrics, all in a very subtle range of shades. But I was a bit stumped as to what to do for the design. And I was rummaging for something else, and I found these little squares that I made for the coverlet of comfort, which I did with Catherine Chambers last year and finished this year. And these were little squares that I didn't use up. They've been basted over pieces of paper, and they're mostly naturally dyed pieces of cotton. So I picked out 3 and put them on as if they were tumbling down, and then I just thought I'd do kind of an explosion of foliage around it, still in neutral colours. And I've just used different shades of grey. This is a kind of a silk tape, which is fine enough to stitch with. This is a beautiful silk pearl thread, which is lovely to use. It's also variegated. And then some cottage garden threads, which I think are produced in Australia or New Zealand. I'm not really sure, but I love the cottage garden threads, especially their variegations. They're hand dyed, not naturally dyed, but they are hand dyed. And that seemed to be perfect for the French knots. So I just ignored the background and let the whole design spread out over the whole square. And I really love to work like that. Then the latest one was the word depth, which of course is connected to the word deep. And I thought about a few things, and I had already laid out this square ready to stitch. And I thought, this reminds me of the entrance to a cave. So I actually made a cave, just a very simplified shape. And then I thought many caves are hidden by foliage, so I partially obscured it with the stitching. I've done some couching of some gold thread, and then feather stitch and some back stitch with detached chain. And then I did a little bit more feather stitch and fly stitch down here. One of the things I do like to do is add a 3-dimensional element as well, using cord, and this is a variegated cord, and I just knotted it randomly and stitched that down as if I was couching it, but I left the loops loose. I was really pleased with that. I also did a little bit of grass down at the bottom. Then I went ahead and collaged another square. So this, I suppose, I will use for the next word, which I'll be drawing out today. And we're actually on week 30, which is quite amazing. So we're going to draw out the word for week 30. This is going to be fun. The word is pleat. So I guess you could represent something that is pleated, such as a pleated skirt or whatever, but my immediate thought is to just pleat some fabric and run with it. This is something that I really like doing, and I've done that on quite a few of my squares, including my aroma square from a couple of weeks ago, where I just loosely folded it and stitched it down. But pleating is a little bit more structured. You can do regular pleats, you can do random pleats, whatever you would like. So I think this will be a great way to really get into manipulating your fabric. Sometimes this is something that we find it a bit difficult to do because we're so used to working on a flat piece of cloth. But this way you can actually start to get three-dimensional. So I'm really looking forward to what you're going to do with this word.